Celtics Reddit podcast.
Marcus Smart is so good. Tatum, Brown, got it. Shot a three.
Hello and welcome to the Celtics Reddit podcast. Ben Ballas here. Thank you for joining us. Hope you're doing well. We're doing what we call a fan therapy pod for you all tonight. A nice, casual, cruisy show to fit the mood currently permeating throughout the Celtics fan base. The Celtics 1-3 after the All-Star break. Not great at all. We're going to get into that and, of course, some of the top posts from Celtics Reddit over the past week. Bless you, Jackson. Joining us from up there in beautiful Newcastle, it's Jackson, a.k.a. Rickman Lives. Welcome, Jackson. How's things?
I've got a cold, obviously. No, I don't have a cold. It's just been flooding here in Newcastle. I thought I muted my microphone then, so yeah, my apologies. I'm all right, I guess. Could be better for many reasons, but I'm sure we'll get into that. But thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Great, yeah, we're definitely getting into it in a second. And of course, we've got the man, the myth, Larbird33. It's currently 2 a.m. his time. How you doing, sir? Thanks for staying up. How's things?
Oh, man, it's good. Yeah, fuck it. Let's just tank. Let's just tank the season.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, it's not the worst idea.
How are you guys doing? I heard that you're getting like insane amounts of rainfall.
Yeah, it's raining pretty heavily here at the moment. It's just it's kind of a fitting thing, right? Like it's raining shit on the Celtics and their fans. It's currently raining very, very heavily in
completely
in our country.
Symbolic and appropriate. Yeah.
So it's fine. It fits the mood.
No flooding or anything though, right? You guys are good where you're at.
Yeah, no flooding in my area, but I mean not my very, very specific area, but like around me. Yeah, shit, yeah. Flooding everywhere.
Wow. Yeah.
It's not so much flooding here, but there's torrents of water going down the streets. I guess that's technically flooding. But I sent you guys a video, but I was standing on the footpath today, like filming it as a bus drove by this guy, and it's like completely
splashed
wet the shit out of him. That's so good. And then he got mad. And like shook his fist at the bus. And because he stood there in that spot, which is obviously a danger zone, another car drove past and splashed him again, which I didn't get on video, but still very funny. So it's not all bad.
Yeah, everyone like thinks of Seattle as being, really rainy here, but I was reading on, we get like, I guess 37 inches per year. Again, sorry, metric system and all that, but we get about 37 inches per year. I was reading there was a part of Australia that had like half of that in like 24 hours. So I was wondering how you guys are doing, but yeah, it's good to hear you're not flooding at least.
We have 150 millimeters, which is 15 centimeters, which is 6 inches, something like that. I think if I work.
Nice job.
Yeah, there we go. Real maths. Yeah.
Look, let's bring it back home here. Let's start with.
You want to talk about the Celtics, really? You want to talk about them?
I think we need to. This is why we call it a fan therapy pod. It's just like talk it out, vent. I think it's helpful for the listeners. It's certainly helpful for me. So let's just get it out there. I really have no run sheet, no preparation.
Just transition to a all Top Shot podcast.
Look, I'm very open to that. If it descends into a Top Shot podcast, that's fine. But we should start with the loss to the Cavs today. Tatum and Brown both statistically had good games, and yet we lost the game. Larbird, do you think Tatum and Brown need to do more here, or is it more on the supporting cast who are to blame?
Tatum seemed like he was doing quite a lot down the stretch, as well as Brown. They're both playing great, I think, for the most part. It's just the supporting cast. Our supporting cast is garbage right now. If you don't have Kemba out there, then we don't really have much helping them. So we're losing to teams like the Cavs. It definitely seems like we need to shake something up before the trade deadline. Or really, I made the joke earlier, but we're at 500 right now with more than half the season over.
Yeah,
it's not looking good.
No.
The Hawks are above us in the standings currently, which I don't know if that's ever happened. Ever. It's crazy. Jackson, where do you stand on the situation right now, Cavs game and beyond?
The last time the Hawks were above us, Jeff Teague was an all-star, so let that sink in.
Yeah. Holy shit.
Wow.
How things change.
I think I joked maybe a month ago, we think this is painful, but how painful would it be if we got knocked out in a playing game to the Hornets on a Terry Rozier or a Gordon Hayward buzzer beater? That won't happen because the Hornets are going to finish well above us and probably safely in the playoff spots, and we'll be battling it out with the Hawks or the Knicks. To answer your question, I think it would be Tatum and Brown aren't playing perfect by any means. They've had their stretches where they haven't been great. I think they weren't that great in the first half, and that's where the majority of the problems seem to grow from this game. The age-old, dig ourselves a hole, try and get out of it, and then fail to do so. So yeah, I think the Sporting Cast does need to do more, but at the same time, I mean, how much more can they do? How much better can the guys that we have get? You know what I mean? I mean, Timelord aside, who I'm sure we'll probably talk about as the one ray of light that's come out of the last few games. I just don't feel like the depth is there in the squad and the quality's not there. So we're going to be asking these guys to really, and Kemba, of course, who was out today, which you can assign some of the reason to that, I guess. But I just don't think the squad is really strong enough. I'd like to think it will get better and we can play, like an old Brad Stevens sort of team that's the underdog, that's gritty, that can get back to it. But I just don't think it's in these guys.
Yeah, it does certainly seem that way, and a lot of people throw the blame towards Brad Stevens, and yet, like, we've seen him kind of coach much less good-looking teams, at least on paper, to deep playoff runs, and so it's really hard to put your finger on it. I know that people listen to a podcast, people talk about the Celtics, it's like you come and listen to people talk about the Celtics for answers. That answer is sort of hard to come by at the moment. We could say it's a personnel issue, but we've done podcasts where we've talked about how we basically have the same top 8 as we had last year when we did our deep playoff run. Obviously, there are some variables this year that weren't present last year, like COVID-19, like Tatum recovering from COVID-19, Smart with his injury, Kemba missing back-to-backs. There are some differences, but with what we've seen from Brad Stevens' coach teams before, almost in a Spursian kind of way, personnel isn't supposed to matter. But then again, we've got a lot of young, rookies and sophomores on this team. Maybe it does matter. Maybe we need to shake up. And I'm just so sick of the 3 letters, TPE. We've talked about it all year. We've talked about all the candidates. We know who's potentially available, who we can bring onto this team, and I'm so sick. It's such a first world problem, and I'm so sick of it. Like, I just want that moment, the trade deadline, to come and go, and so we all know what's happening, what is up. Are we looking to improve this team? Are we going to hold off to next season? Who can we reasonably get? It's just at this point now where I think everyone's lost their patience. And even listening to Jason Tatum talk in his post-game presser today, he was clearly out of patience as well. He seemed very, very frustrated with the situation. Can't blame the guy. On the Reddit side of things, on the post-game thread, this is the top most upvoted comment on the post-game thread by user Clayish, who wrote, "We suck," which just sums it up perfectly. Yeah. Larbird, do you think, like, Tell me everything's going to be okay, Larbird. Like, can we get out of this hole? What do you think?
You touched on it earlier. So if we're looking for the optimistic take, it's still that same thing where we have essentially the same team that we had that made a run to the Eastern Conference Finals. If you're talking about the playoffs, because Hayward wasn't available. So you can make a 8-man rotation or a 9-man rotation, and all you're really doing is changing Wanamaker to Pritchard. And you could, theoretically have that same team. And with more practice time and with the fans back, maybe, even at the limited capacity fans, maybe they give them a little bit of motivation, bit more time to actually prepare for the games because it doesn't sound like they're practicing at all. That's the positive side of it, which is that, once we get to the playoffs, presumably they'll actually try harder and be more focused and we'll have more minutes to guys like Tatum and Brown. You'll normally play those guys like 40 plus minutes in the playoffs. We could be still dangerous. Like, I wouldn't count this team out at all. But yeah, right now it definitely, it's starting to feel more and more like those early 2000s Celtics teams with Walker and Pierce. And I guess, Kemba's kind of like our Kenny Anderson. And then you have guys like Thompson, who's like our Mark Blount. And, we're just waiting for someone else to step up. We got Smart back recently. He's making contributions, but we haven't really seen everyone at full speed yet. Maybe Romeo Langford is going to step in next week and post-COVID and just shock the world.
Yeah. So much pressure on Romeo Langford. Like, all the posts on Reddit, Twitter, like, oh, don't worry, everything's going to be fine when Romeo Langford comes back. Like, I actually do not envy this guy at all. Jackson, do you share any of that optimism? Do you think that there's some hope for this team, or are you ready to give up and fade for Cade, as it were?
I think the one thing I'm going to gravitate to that Larbird said was the practice thing. I think if you've got a team that is less talented than your opponents, then I guess the only way you can really beat them is if you play really good, solid team basketball. And the only way you can develop that, well, like a key part of that is practice, and then you got to put it, obviously, that into play in the game. So it does feel a lot like it's just a lot of give Tatum the ball, give Brown the ball, it's Marcus Smart's turn, he'll jack up a three sort of situations. Well, it's very ISO heavy, and it's not really, there's not a lot of cohesiveness around. So I think if we got a little bit more practice, or just any practice whatsoever, I think you would see a bit of an uptick. But so yeah, I like that idea that if we can practice more, particularly going into the playoffs, then we might have that underdog factor back again, and that just might suit us a little bit more. But at the same time, I think this is just who we are, unfortunately.
Yeah, Jackson, you touched on this also, I think, a couple weeks ago, where you were saying that some of it's probably a motivational thing where they are a young team. And I just keep thinking back to, like, I'm not comparing this team to this team, but the Shaq, Kobe, Lakers, where they would just kind of dog it for the whole season, and then come playoff time they would try. And yeah. I mean, and I'm not comparing us to that team, because obviously that team won 3 championships, but the whole mentality there was like they had done it, they'd been there, and they just didn't really have they couldn't get excited for regular season games. And I do wonder if that's happening right now with Tatum and Brown. They've very, very young age, they've made it to 2 Eastern Conference finals, and they're now playing with no fans in attendance, no practice. And they must just be like, whatever. Once the playoffs come around, we'll be fine. And right now they're sitting in the 7th seed, and they're playing a little bit of a dangerous game, because they could still potentially fall out of the playoffs. But really, I mean, once the playoffs come around, we should be fine, I think. I mean, I'm still holding on to that hope that once the playoffs come around, we'll be fine.
Yeah, it's very 98 Bulls of us, right? You know, we've got our MJ in, I guess, Jason Tatum. We've got our Pippen in Jaylen Brown. And we've got our Rodman in Marcus Smart, and our sort of philosophical coach there, our Phil Jackson in Brad Stevens. And, you know we're awesome. We don't give a shit. Like, we're just going to turn it on in the playoffs, and that's fine. I'm kidding, of course, but we're clutching at straws at this point. There's a Reddit user, Deport the Fort 20, who made a post, got more upvotes than our episodes normally do on Celtics Reddit. Go figure. Who else is surprised? And they go on to say, I thought this would be an easy W, but I guess the Celtics had other plans. Getting very tired of this. Were you guys surprised? I mean, it's the obvious follow-up question. With this Cavs game, are you getting to the point where you go into a game like this, second night of a back-to-back, no Kemba, against a team that we should easily beat, and then we lose to them? Does that surprise you at this point in the season?
You know what? It is the below 500 teams that kind of like bother me the most. Like you play the Jazz, you play the Nets, you play the Sixers. I'm not expecting a win, but we always seem to be competitive in those games. We do seem to fall off like rather regularly and consistently, like in the clutch, which is concerning in itself. But I don't remember a game, probably bar the Brooklyn game on Christmas, where we played a team that was supposedly like much better than us, and we really looked second best. I can't think of any other example that at least come to mind. So yeah, again, it probably lends itself to a mentality thing, a complacency thing, and that can be symptomatic of young teams. So as much I would love to think that it is just that mentality of like, oh, it's the Cavs, or it's the Pistons, or it's the Kings, or it's et cetera, et cetera. So whatever, we're not really going to try, and we ended up just getting punched in the mouth. And I thought we would have maybe learned from it by now, but I don't. Again, if it is just one of those, we'll just take it easy until it becomes crunch time, then sweet. But I think being at 500 in the 7th seed and in the play-in position at the moment, I would like to see us just take these games a little bit more seriously. So yeah, the Kings on Saturday, I'm worried about that. I'm worried more about that than if we were to play the Clippers or the Lakers or someone of that ilk.
Yeah, if this was the Clippers, if we played the Clippers today, we win
Easy
that game
win.
100 times
Easy
out of
win,
100.
yeah.
Full strength Clippers side. But of course, it's the Cavs, and it's is his name Dean Wade? Is that his name? Dean Wade just absolutely crushed us. Back-breaking 3 late in the game. Dean Wade. Unbelievable. I'm sorry. LaBird, do these losses surprise you at this point in the season?
I feel like I could just make up a bunch of things that we can grasp, more straws to grasp at. Coming off back-to-back against Utah, who has the best record in the NBA, we played them tight. It was a bit of a disappointing loss. Maybe that just led to us just not really giving a shit tonight. I don't know. I mean, there's all sorts of little things. We're a few days away from fans being let in, I think the 22nd, and we're a week away from the trade deadline. And I imagine there's a bit of that uncertainty too, because obviously everyone on the team is to a certain extent available.
Yeah.
Maybe aside from Tatum and Brown. So
who had good games
I imagine
today.
A lot of guys.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah. Right. But everyone else must be, there must be just like, let's see what happens when the dust settles. There's a lot of things, I don't know if we'll make a trade. I feel like a lot of what Danny's saying right now in the media, where he's like, our options are better in the offseason. There's truth to it, but I do feel like that's partially posturing. I think they'll probably go hard after someone like Barnes, and even a smaller move, just trading someone like Thompson for another wing can make a big improvement. If they're not going to play someone like Nesmith any minutes and not even try to develop him, then getting someone who can play minutes is a good idea. So, there's moves they can make. And even the buyout market, there's options. We rumored to be potentially going after someone like LaMarcus Aldridge, like any kind of talent that we can add to that bench and add a little bit of depth is a potentially a good thing that will help us a bit. So, not surprised by the loss, because I just feel like right now we're kind of in this little holding period before the storm, or, at least until we focus for our final half of the season and our final playoff push.
Yeah, absolutely. I had this reserved for the Reddit recap later, but this was posted by a user, Smart Celtics, and it's a danger cart tweet. Ryan Bernardoni, friend of the show, happy to say, who tweeted, either you think this team is good enough to invest future assets into, or you don't, and so should be trying to sell at least Tice, Thompson, and Ojale if you can get anything for them. And then in brackets, and Kemba too, but that probably has to wait for the off season. So a little bit it sounds like the commonality between us and I'm sure a lot of fans is that we're sort of struggling to figure out what the identity of this team is, and very reminiscent of that 2019 team as well. And if nothing else, the trade deadline might serve to answer that very major question among the fan base is like, where are we headed here? And depending on whether we're buyers or sellers at the deadline there, we might at least get some closure in terms of like, okay, like we kind of understand the trajectory, or at least the planned trajectory of this team going forward. Any thoughts on that at all, Jackson?
I would say probably you think about what the Bucks have done, right? They gave away a shitload of picks to get Drew Holiday, and then they gave away even more picks to get PJ Tucker and that Latvian Karukas, I think his name is, shooter. Now, if that's a
great name.
Yeah. Did he like choke his girlfriend or something out? Anyway, never mind.
I'll Google it.
So yeah, if we did that, not that like that would necessarily fit our team, but I think the Bucks are doing something where they've failed in the playoffs a couple of times. They're probably in the back of their mind thinking, shit, if we don't like look like we're serious here, we're going to risk losing Giannis to a Lakers or someone like that. So they are going after it, but that it might reek of desperation to some people, or it might look like they've identified what their identity is, and they're looking to strengthen that. And picks be damned, future assets be damned. We're going to make a run now, and we're going to make ourselves the strongest we can be. So there's definitely, I would like to see us do that. Like if we have to give up, if we have to break the bank to get the players that we need, then we should. But are the players that we need, and we've been over this so many times, are they out there? Are they available? So as much as it sucks to see us sort of, the uncertainty and somewhat of a stagnation to a degree of just this team not really knowing what its identity is and not really going after it, are you going to be able to strengthen that or improve that or really define your identity with the players that are available there? Or is it going to come in the offseason? So, these are decisions that Danny Ainge in the front office has to make. And I think he's damned if he does and damned if he doesn't, while the results are the way that they are. So it's not an easy position to be in, but you can't tolerate this kind of again, it's complicated. It's way more complicated, and I don't want to be reactionary because a lot of people are being reactionary, but it really is, like, the more you think about it, like a really tough position, to be in, to be honest.
Middle of the pack mediocrity, I think, is how I would describe it. It's like, who are we? And this is kind of not, I mean, some of the best teams ever have always, they've always bottomed out at that sort of 8 to 10 seed, which is kind of where we're at now. And great teams like the Jazz, like the Heat, they never really tank. Like, they just kind of get as bad as they can be while trying to be good, and then find a way to get better. So I like to think that we're in that kind of tier of team. And I'm not saying that we're going to finish out the season in the 10th seed, but like, maybe this is the calm before the storm. Maybe this is something that we look back on with glee in the future and think, oh, that was terrible before it all got better. Like, I do have some faith that we are that kind of franchise. But, we live in the present. We're reacting to what happened today and in the last couple of weeks. And at the moment, it fucking sucks balls. So on that, so Jason Tatum on the frustration of this stretch, this is posted to the sub by Horseshoe Overlook, and it's a J King tweet. Tatum said, "It's tough, but we're all in this together, so we're going to figure it out." So the reason we've talked about whether or not they can figure it out. We've talked about reasons for optimism, but what about the angle of, does Ainge need to make a move to appease Tatum? We've talked about it in recent weeks, but, as it continues to clearly become more frustrating for Tatum there, does he need to put maybe his ultimate future plan aside, Danny Ainge that is, and make some sort of move to appease Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown to sort of limit those frustrations and show them that we're trying to be a franchise to support them to the ultimate goal of a championship, Blabert?
Well, I don't know if they can really make any move right now that's going to realistically, on paper, put them on the level of a team like Brooklyn, who's still dominating teams since won 6 in a row and is now tied for the best record in the East. So I don't know if there's really any move they can realistically make that anyone's going to consider them a real threat to beat Brooklyn or even Philly or Milwaukee. So, I mean, they're probably going to end up in that 4th to 8th seed range, and I don't really know if it matters where they end up in that range. I mean, obviously, if they end up stuck against Brooklyn in the first round, that sucks.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this can happen. This stuff can change quickly. We're only a game and a half out of the 4th seed, which is Miami right now, which is funny because for most of this season, Miami was like the bottom in the standings, and they shot right up like a rocket. Mm-hmm. We could do the same thing. We could do the same thing. I don't know if Ainge has to make any move. I don't think he has to, but it does seem like that, they need to go back to the drawing board and figure out what rotation works, and they haven't really done that yet. I really do think they have to make some move. They have to do something. Like, I don't really know. We love Tice on the show, but this is the last year of his contract, and there's a decent chance he just walks. I mean, I haven't heard anything about them guaranteeing that he's staying. So why would you keep him if you think there's a decent chance he's going to walk? You could probably get something for him.
Yeah.
And right now with Timelord putting up great stats off the bench, like, I don't really know why you would keep him. But either way, like, either move Tice or Thompson or someone for a small forward, or move Timelord for a big, huge upgrade in a huge package. But I don't really understand the whole standing pat thing. Like, I of all the years, I do feel like this is the one where Ainge is more than likely to do something. But I wouldn't be stunned if we did nothing. I would just be a little disappointed, and I'd be a little confused because there's obvious holes on this team. And I guess if that happens, then we just start looking at the buyout market, and we just kind of keep kicking the can down the road and moving goalposts. But it does feel like something has to happen.
So I tried to keep my miscellaneous notes to good points only, knowing that, the ultimate goal of this podcast is to try and make us and everyone else feel better. And it's just peppered with notes related to Time Lord. And it was great. And his injury history and his conditioning has been a concern. But, we saw him sort of bang, or it looked like even hyperextend his knee today. And ultimately he came back into the game there. And he's been actually a really bright spot over these last 4 games. And his passing, his cutting off the ball, his finishing, his defense, and his role in the team defense, like talking out the defense. You could see him yelling at guys, getting them in position. It's just a very, very, you mentioned that we're clutching at straws. Like, I'm clutching to that fucking straw so hard right now because there's not much else going on. Has Time Lord helped you guys at all, sort of therapeutically maintain your enthusiasm for this team? Because he certainly helped me. Definitely.
I've been a big believer in him for a while now, but more just like blind optimism because he can jump really high. But
it helps.
He's one of those guys that now when he's on the court, you feel his presence. He's out there. I can't say the same for Daniel Tice. I can't say the same for Tristan Thompson. I can't say the same for Semi Ojeleye down the list. When he's on there is a difference. There's a tangible difference in the offense and even in the defense. And I think like your word's starting to get out around the league of like, what he's capable of and what he can do. So if that's going to like disrupt offenses, or if that's going to, give us any kind of edge whatsoever, then, unless you can trade him, I know that's not what you asked, but unless you can like trade him for like a serious upgrade in a package and get something that's going to like make us contenders now, I would not be touching him at all. You know, as far as I'm concerned, like hot take incoming, man. I would have him like third underneath Brown for most untradeable guys. To be perfectly honest, I know that's probably a little bit much, but like I'm just so high on him, and I think everyone's like starting to come around to, you know, the potential that he's got. So, you know, if we can keep him and he can develop, you know, and get better and better, like health permitting, then, you know, there's a center that we have for years and years to come. And I think he's a good complement to Tatum and Brown, to be perfectly honest. But,
yeah,
you know, again, clutching at straws because it's not resulting in wins. It's not really. And I think he had a negative plus minus of like 13 or something today too. I might be wrong about that, but it's at least a positive, and it's at least something to sort of be optimistic about. You know, once you get past, you know, Tatum and Brown's potential, of course.
Yeah, well, I suppose the other argument is that Time Lord's trade value may never be this high. It's at its peak. What do you think about that, Larbird?
Yeah, maybe. Is he 24? Is he 24 now?
Yeah, thereabouts. Yeah.
Well, I was early to the bandwagon, I guess, of thinking that he was our best big, and I guess this season has just kind of strengthened that feeling. But I don't know. I mean, his trade value, I think, is probably the highest of our young guys, other than Tatum and Brown right now. It seems like that's the case, and I think Pritchard's up there too. And you would think that Romeo and Neesmith would have trade value, but they're just mystery boxes. Like nobody really knows what they are, and they haven't played any minutes. So the idea of trading them, I just can't imagine trading them without getting, you know, trading them for nothing more or less, and that's a bad idea. So of our tangible guys that are playing, he seems like the one that has probably the most trade value. You asked, the earlier question was, you know, if he's a bright spot. Yeah, he's a bright spot right now, and I love what I'm seeing from him. And it's gonna be really confusing to me if we just stand pat and like, oh yeah, we're good with our three bigs still, and we're good with Timelord in the third option on the bigs. Like that wouldn't make any sense to me. I just don't think. I don't think all season it hasn't worked. And I get keeping minutes. You know, I get the idea of continuing to play Thompson and Tice big minutes because our veterans, and we're lacking veteran players. And also, I think. I honestly, I feel like if you just start benching Thompson, it's a bad look for his trade value. You want to keep him getting minutes. But now we're like a week away from the trade deadline. One of those guys I feel like has to go.
Yep.
And I'd be surprised if they don't do it. It would be really confusing. Like we're at 500 right now. Why not just throw Time Lord out there and let him do what he does? Like, I don't see a path where we're like contending with Thompson and Tice as key players with Time Lord off the bench. Just don't see it. So either you trade a bunch of guys for Vucevic and get a major upgrade, or you trade one of those guys and just start doing all in on the developing of Time Lord. I just don't get the idea of three of them past the next week. So we'll have lots to talk about after trade deadline.
Yeah.
So right now I'm just like, you know, sitting back and seeing what happens. But
yeah, it's a holding pattern at this point, and you know, we've ummed and ahed about it all year. And you know, I think on the last podcast alone, I was like, Harrison Barnes is the guy, and I've kind of deviated from that opinion in that, like, I understand like the theory behind bolstering that starting lineup and you know, getting Tatum and Brown and Harrison Barnes all as these very versatile switchable wings all in one lineup. But if you can move Tristan Thompson, if you can use some or all of the TPE to actually bolster the bench, and because if you look at the numbers, like the bench scoring disparity between us and our opponents over the last 4 games or so is, I haven't got the numbers in front of me, but I checked them earlier, very much in favor of the opponent. And it's a consistent flaw with this team. And if we can get, you know, a guy like George Hill out there instead of Jeff Teague, for example, and other equivalents of those switches, you know, lower salary guys that are that could be acquired by the Celtics. We have assets. We've got, you know, all of our first round picks. We've got the TPE. Well, we can plug some of those gaps. I think that's when maybe we start to see a bit more longevity, and it allows for guys like Tatum and Brown or Kemba to have the occasional off night, because we've got sort of more reliable backups that can, like, quite literally step up and plug those gaps. We just don't have that at the moment. It's depth, in a word, is a problem for us.
I would push back on that a little bit. Is like I think, you know, I think that right now everyone's a little frustrated and we're impatient and we just want things to happen right away.
Absolutely.
I am 100% convinced that if we wanted to get Harrison Barnes, or if we wanted to get Jeremy Grant, or a number of those guys, even Vucevic, I believe that we have the assets to do it. Like 100% believe this. I believe we could absolutely get one of those guys if that's what Ainge wanted to do. And so you asked earlier, like, is there pressure to appease Tatum? You know, maybe Ainge has to sit down with him and say, hey, look, this is what the cost is to get Barnes. And if he's not going to do it, then he has to explain what the justification is to wait. You know, explain to him like, hey, we're kind of just hoping that you guys are going to figure it out this season, and then in the off season, we're going to get DeRozan for free or something like that. Like whatever the idea is, because otherwise it just doesn't, I mean, I just don't really understand. So yeah, sorry, I'm a little scatterbrained here, but like the idea of standing pat just doesn't work. And I think you can still get one of those guys like Barnes and use him as an asset down the road for a Beal or someone else. Like, as long as it's a 2 or 3 year contract, you can kind of swap out that TPE for another tangible player that's making big money that can use the salary matching. So I feel like there's tons of motivation to do something right now for both the short and long term. And the only reason you wouldn't do it is if you really, really are convinced that, oh, if I wait until the off season, then I can get this other thing. And I'm not sure what that would be really.
Jackson, did Larry Nance Jr. pass his audition today, and would he even want to play for the Celtics at this point?
Yeah, who knows, man. Again, it's not the sexy move. It's not the move that everybody wants to see. But you're right. If it means bolstering the bench, and it means getting production from the bench, and it just means plugging the gaps that we have, then I'd be in favor of it. Is that guy Larry Nance Jr.? Yeah, maybe. I'm sure he would help. I'm sure he could do a job. But I mean, I don't know. He didn't blow me away. Would he be useful? Sure. But I mean, with our other guys, I'd rather go after. I think he wouldn't be top of my list, to be honest.
I thought he looked pretty sexy today. He was blowing me out of the water, or whatever the expression was. I was very, very turned on by Larry Nance Jr. Sorry, Labo. What were you going to say?
No, I was going to say. I mean, you mentioned like George Hill. The point I was trying to make is, using that TPE for just little pieces here and there, I feel like that's a waste, and that would be the most disappointing thing to me, because I think that would be by far the most puzzling to me. It's like, yeah, I get getting some role players, but if you have an opportunity, and I do think we have the opportunity to get a bigger name talent with a larger chunk of that TPE, it would just kind of confuse me that you're just eating into that for role players that are really not going to move the needle that much. But I mean, anything can happen. We'll see.
Yeah, and I partially agree with you. And it's like you said, like we're impatient and we're not thinking rationally, and that's me. So we're just talking it out here. That's what we're doing. Before we get to the remaining Reddit posts that we have sort of sidelined, my notes prior to the game today for whatever this podcast was going to end up being was that, ultimately I was kind of thinking, okay, we're going to talk about how we went 2-2 in this stretch after the All-Star game. Obviously that didn't happen, but with that I was going to kind of angle that the losses to the Nets and the Jazz were good losses in a way. So sticking with the clutching at straws, sticking with the optimism angle, did you, I guess, prior to the loss today, feel at all like those losses were promising good losses? Like we looked good for the majority of those games? Or am I just like a crazy Homer Celtics fan at this point?
No, I felt pretty good after the Jazz loss, to be fair. I mean, you talked about the bench. If you've got Jordan Clarkson and Joe Ingles getting you 34 off the bench and hitting 8 threes, 10 threes, something like that, then that would be great if we could have something like that. So when you're losing because of differences like that, and an egregious disparity in free throws against one of the best teams in the NBA, then you can feel pretty good about that kind of a loss. You can, and if you don't, then I mean, I get it, losing sucks, but bigger picture here, it's not so bad. But when you zoom out to an even bigger picture and you realize you've gone 0-8 against the best teams in the league, your Nets, your Sixers, your Lakers, Jazz now, Suns, and they all seem to reek of the same pattern, which is be competitive but just can't quite get it over the line at the end, then that still irks. That still isn't right, and that just screams that we need a fix, or we need an attitude adjustment, or we need better execution, or what have you. But no, after the Jazz loss in particular, I was feeling rather optimistic. But again, you look at the overall season record, and it's it's kind of damning, unfortunately.
Yeah, like at least we're playing the Cavs tomorrow. I guess it'll be fine until we lose to them. Larbert, anything to add there at all?
Obviously, no loss is a good loss. I mean, it sucks to lose, but seeing us hang tight with the bigger teams, I know we're 0-8 against them, but seeing us hang tight against the bigger teams when it's clear that our bench is like laughably bad right now, it's sort of encouraging. I mean, it's I guess a moral victory to a certain extent. There was stats that Scal showed today on the broadcast, which was just showing that our team's just been falling apart once Tatum sits out. Like our plus minus without him has been really bad. And that's all stuff that could be addressed even with a couple buyout candidates. So it's like, hey, we got our core in place. Smart's back. Brown and Tatum are back. Kemba's looking better. Yeah, just get a couple pieces here, and then we could beat anyone on any given night, and we can make anyone's life a living hell in the playoffs. We've proven this year after year. We've overachieved, aside from a couple years ago, but usually we overachieve. And so seeing us hang tight with these guys and not getting outright blown out is kind of a moral victory, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. And it really just comes down to like, okay, let's just get to the trade deadline. Like, let's just see who we are. Let's see what the plan is. It's going to be a really illuminating day, right? When we figure out what the moves are or aren't, and we figure out who we are and where we're going from there. Until then, it's just every win and every loss, it's like an emotional tug of war. Like, it's just pulling you in both directions, and we don't really know where we stand. We've just got what have we got here? 4 more Reddit posts to get to that we haven't managed to weave in to our discussion so far. We're going to spend a couple of minutes on each of these, and we're going to wrap it up. So the first one is by user Beantown00, who writes, "We must have the most predictable late game offense in the league." And they go on to write, I'm going to try and summarize this. We have to have the most predictable offense ever down the stretch of games. Like, it must just be so easy to game plan for and coach against. We don't get easy shots for anyone and usually rush and make absolutely terrible decisions. It usually ends with someone taking an awful double or triple teamed shot. Opposing coaches know that the ball is most likely going to be in Tatum's hand, and that we might do this in a high pick and roll and just have him ISO against the mismatch, and goes on to call out a few other sort of typical actions that we run. So where is your confidence at in Brad Stevens and the offense at this point? Do you think it's systematic? Do you think it's personnel based, like we've touched on? What's your reaction to Beantown00's post here?
Look, I yearn for the days when we would have a timeout with maybe 5 seconds to go and Brad would drop a play that most of the time. Days, yeah. My favorite one of all being the Jaylen Brown 3 against the Jazz, just to name one. But I mean, yeah, I would like to see that creativity come back. But I mean, Brad knows his players. I mean, they obviously trust Tatum to hit the big shots, and he has hit big shots, this season. So it's not the worst option in the world to go with it. But I mean, there's definitely truth to that it does become predictable. And I mean, if we can see it, us, fans of the game that aren't in any professional capacity associated with the team, then guys who get paid serious money to prevent these things from happening would have way more data and way more film and way more, know-how on how to stop this. And if it is getting stopped and if it is predictable, then, that's a real issue. And I don't think Brad Stevens is incapable of, bringing good plays out and getting other guys other guys the ball or other guys important shots. But I think that probably lies more with Tatum and Brown, making other guys better and, excelling as playmakers. So, and evidently they just don't have the confidence the other guys. So yeah, I think I don't see that changing this season. Not without reinforcements.
There was a point in the last couple of games where down the stretch we had some open Marcus Smart looks and they didn't go in, and I found myself thinking I'd rather just Tatum take a contested shot there. I mean, it's just, I do think part of it is a lack of talent, unfortunately. This, again, I kind of mentioned earlier that I feel like this is starting to look more and more like the Walker and Pierce Celtics, where we only really had 2 guys that were reliably able to score. Just looking at like so I mean, ideally you'd want to have those guys surrounded by elite shooters who can knock down shots, like a Seth Curry type or something. And just looking at our roster right now, weirdly, our top 3-point shooter is Jeff Teague, 42%. Grant Williams 41%, but neither of those guys I feel like I want taking shots down the stretch, really.
Or being on the court at all.
Yeah.
Right. And then Peyton Pritchard has shot over 40% this season from three, and he's someone who I keep wanting to see him get more and more minutes. I mean, he's looking decent, but we really don't have any reliable guys outside of those two, and if Kemba's not going to be playing some of these games, then it's tough. I mean, it's a tough thing because you want to have a balanced offense if you have the talent to do it. But right now, it does seem like just giving it to Tatum and Brown and stepping out of the way, it might be our best option, unfortunately.
Yeah, so this kind of segues into the next post. This is by user ACAT20, and they write, "In surprising news, our ISO-heavy offense is very inefficient." They go on to say, "So after watching Tatum clank another contested ISO shot early in the shot clock, I went to take a look at whether or not it's actually a worthwhile shot." And they've posted a link to basically the player isolation stats that are on NBA.com. And they write, per the NBA's stats by isolation play type, Jason Tatum is shooting 35.2% on 4.8 possessions per game. This excludes his quote-unquote post-up possessions, where he's shooting 44.1% on 2.1 possessions per game. The real outlier is that he's only getting to the line 5.5% of the time on these ISOs, by far the lowest of anyone getting near that many possessions in the league. Jalen is also shooting a paltry 38.5% on his 1.8 ISO possessions. But it kind of goes back to what you were saying a second ago, Labert. It's like, what the fuck else are they supposed to do? Like, they've got Grant Williams and Jeff Teague out there with them half the time. Are they supposed to kick out to these guys? Like, are they supposed to, do you see a solution there with the current personnel? Or is this just feeding back into the trade deadline talk? Like, where do we go from here?
Well, I would be curious what Jackson would say, but I mean, I don't know with this current personnel. Those like, isolation has those isolation stats, those percentages being low for Tatum. Keep in mind, he gets way more defensive attention to anyone, and if he doesn't have a great supporting cast, then it makes his job infinitely harder. So if he had some guys out there that were able to, consistently knock down shots, that would change things. And even like, the thing I failed to mention before is, even if you have a guy like Grant Williams and you have a guy like Semi Ojeleye shooting higher percentages, those guys aren't commanding any defensive attention at all. Nobody gives a fuck about them. They're not paying attention to them.
Me included.
So,
sorry.
Yeah. So, I mean, you'd be better off having a JJ Redick who, even if he's having a terrible season, at least he's a decoy. And it's like, oh, we have to defend him. Like, nobody's paying attention to Jeff Teague right now. So it makes it so much harder for Tatum. It's like, what is he supposed to do? What's Brown supposed to do?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I do feel like we have to do something. We have to make some kind of move to address.
Maybe the
secret
is just getting Kemba more shots in the clutch. I don't know. I mean, I know he clanked that one against the Lakers, but that was still, I think he was still coming back again from his knee, and that was like a broken down play, and he just was like, oh shit, I better take it now, and didn't go in. But maybe the secret's just getting Kemba more involved. I don't know.
Yeah, and I would love to see more. Obviously, I'm not some sort of basketball X's and O's mastermind, but I wouldn't mind seeing a bit more spot-up opportunities for Kemba Walker. It seems like the majority of his shots, and I know it's by design because that's where he's been most successful in his career, but majority of his shots from three come off that sort of above the break pull-up three, right? Sometimes Tice or Big will set a little pick for him as he's bringing the ball up, and it'll be a quick 2-3 seconds into the shot clock pull-up three. I'd love to see almost like how I'm going to put out the name Steph Curry, but there's a lot of off-ball movement that Steph Curry employs in the Warriors offense that really opens him up for some really good shots once the defense adjusts to his on-ball game, where he'll sort of give the ball up and sort of run sort of an action through the middle and flare out off a screen to the corner and either get a shot or be in a position to dribble and make a play. I'd love to see something like that for Kemba Walker. I just think that we don't put him in that position enough, and we talk about a lack of kick-out options. Smart really is our best kick-out option, and then it comes back down to, like you said, Lightbird, Grant Williams or Jeff Teague. If we can put Kemba in that sort of position to succeed in that sense, like he's got the shooting chops, I think he could be effective there. But there's a reason I don't have a job in basketball, because I don't know what I'm talking about. So,
I mean, just keep in mind he did average 20 points for us in the playoffs this year. So you can't rely on just Tatum and Brown. You have to have someone step up. So if it's not going to be Kemba, then we need to trade for someone. Maybe you trade Kemba. There's people hoping that we trade Kemba for Vucevic. maybe Vucevic fills that role, but tonight we didn't have anyone. It was just Tatum and Brown. So if you have this really, really shallow lineup, the shallow rotation and not much depth, you need someone who's going to be the third guy, and hopefully that's Kemba if he stays and plays well.
Yeah. Now, we've got two more to get to very quickly before we wrap this one up. So this is posted by Lightning Fast 31. It's a Woj bomb, and it says, sources, Houston is trading PJ Tucker, Rodion's Kuruks, who I Googled it, by the way, did get into some trouble there with his partner, and Bucks 2022 first-round pick back to Milwaukee for DJ Augustin, DJ Wilson, and a 2023 unprotected first-round pick. Houston also gets the rights to swap its 2021 second-round pick for Milwaukee's first-round pick, unless it falls 1-9. You with me there? Sorry, that was a huge garble of words. The reason I wanted to bring this up is, one, PJ Tucker was sort of an outlier in terms of a Celtics acquisition, but the main reason is the cost involved in acquiring PJ Tucker, 35 going on 36, if not 36 already. Elder statesman of the league who hasn't really done, hasn't done shit this year, let's be frank. And yet they had to give up, a series of first round picks and players to acquire him. Does this set the market price for the other guys we've been looking at? Does this sort of lower your expectations, Bird, in terms of what might happen during the trade deadline?
No, I mean, if you check the comments, all that what you said, even you saying it out loud and me reading it a couple of times and having trouble wrapping my mind around what that package was. But because the Bucks are very, very good and the Rockets are really, really bad, what it really ends up being, the pick swap doesn't really matter because the Bucks aren't going to be the Rockets aren't going to swap with the Bucks. It makes no sense because they're going to be shitty and the Bucks are going to be good. So what it really ends up being is they're trading like their late first for a high second. So you're maybe moving back like 10 picks. That's really all the cost was. It's like we're moving back 10 picks to get PJ Tucker. So a couple people in the comments mentioned the same thing on Reddit. If you really look at the math of all that and how it works out, all it really is they're potentially stepping back from like pick 30 to pick 40 to get PJ Tucker. So that the cost was actually not great. It was very small. So we shouldn't worry about too much of that, because again, like you said, PJ Tucker's 35. He hasn't done much. He shouldn't have much value. So I actually would go the opposite way and say that that's a sign that the trade value of these guys might not be as high as we thought. There was a point where someone was arguing on Reddit that we should trade Neesmith for PJ Tucker. And I'm like, are you insane? You want to give up our lottery pick for a guy who's 35? And in reality, what ends up happening is like, no, we're just going to trade 30 for 40, more or less.
Yeah. Any thoughts there, Jackson?
I think the one thing that if other GMs think we're desperate and the results would indicate a trade would reek of that, then the asking price may go up. And I think, going back to the Drew Holiday trade that the Bucks made, that was more of an egregious package, I think. But again, if it was like the guy that they wanted and they thought this is how it's going to work, then, you don't worry too much about the picks, essentially. If you know it's the right guy and that's who you want, I think you should go after it. But as far as like the trade market going up, I think it always goes up. It's just exponentially been doing this. A quick soccer analogy. The best player in the world 7 years ago would cost you, I don't know, 20, 30 million pounds or something like that. You're not getting any of the top 10 players in the world now for like anything less than 120 million pounds. Guys who are like, just don't even move the needle or whatever, like 50, 60 million pounds. So if you want to equate that to like an NBA trade package, we're talking like, multiple firsts and, role players and stuff like that. Again, I think it comes down to each individual GM and how they're playing the negotiating game with us or any other team for that matter. But I do think the market is much higher and the costs are a lot steeper for everybody now than they used to be.
I just want to imagine Danny Ainge sitting back in the beginning of the season and thinking, it would be hilarious if I don't do anything and they're forced to play Grant Williams and Samuel Ojale. And this team's going to suck all season. And then mid-season, they're going to be like, oh, yeah, we'll trade for your lottery picks. But actually, in reality, we're a much better team. I want to believe that's the case.
I'd like that too.
We've just pumped up the trade value of our picks all season.
Absolutely diabolical. I'll believe anything at this point. We've got one more to get to. This is again posted by Horseshoe Overlook. Very, very active contributor to Celtics Reddit. And it's a news tweet, I guess you could call it, from Sham Sharania. New guidelines for vaccinated players. And the reason this is interesting is because the scapegoat for every unhappy fan base and probably the teams themselves have been COVID and the mental aspects, the mental impacts as such from COVID. So sources, NBA, NBPA have agreed to new protocols for COVID-19 vaccinated individuals. They are no quarantine for exposure, no PCR tests on days off, interact with any other person at home, not at a bar, club, or lounge, but at home, so you can have guests over. Go to outdoor restaurants, 4 guests on road without prior testing, which is huge, in terms of family joining players on the road. The NBA's fully vaccinated players, coaches, and staffers can now also leave the hotel room at any time, which is insane. You think about all the road games we've had and our guys being stuck in there in the hotel room the entire time. They can attend in-person marketing events, have in-person team meetings. PCR testing can be earlier in the day, so before 5 p.m., and no masks at the practice facility. So this is huge. And, I don't want to sound too spiteful, but unfortunately all of our competitors will also benefit from this. But it's a huge turning point for obviously the folks in the US, so Larbird and co, but also just we've got quite a young team. We've talked about it all year, and this would be a huge mental weight on these guys. And to finally, this isn't the end of it, but it's clearly light at the end of the tunnel, and that alone could be a huge lift off the weight of the shoulders of these guys. So this came out today, guys. What were your immediate thoughts, Jackson, on seeing this news?
I thought about there was the Bill Simmons, Jackie McMullen podcast, I think about a week ago, or maybe just under a week ago, and they went into depth of how many people who work for the teams are just so miserable and just so over the COVID protocols, and how it's having big sort of mental effects on everybody. So I think even if this is beneficial for everyone in the league, and even if that doesn't necessarily give the Celtics the edge, I think any net positive is great. And I think if it's just one less thing they have to worry about, and it just makes them feel a lot more freer and a lot more, less shit that they have to go through, and they can focus on their game a bit more without having this, this cloud of, quarantine and what if I get COVID sort of hanging over me. Then that's great. I don't think, it's still possible that if they relax this, it blows up in their face and that there's another outbreak or whatever. But I guess that's what the vaccine's there for. It's there to stop this stuff from happening. So I trust that the NBA has looked into this enough, and they're confident enough. They've been pretty cautious, and the bubble was a great success, I think, in terms of exposure and whatnot. So if they feel that they've got the data and they've got the information that this is a good idea and they can do this, and it does lead to an overall morale boost for everyone in the NBA, not just the Celtics, then that's wonderful. That's really, really good to see. And obviously having fans coming back in is going to be the next frontier. And I think that's when we'll start to get back to, the NBA that we really, really, really love to see. And I think it'll definitely reflect in performances as well.
Do Tatum and Smart count as vaccinated already because they've already got
the antibodies? Yeah.
I don't. They said, I think they were saying they weren't going to skip any lines, but it sounds like as of May 1st, at least that's what I was reading. Biden said that as of May 1st, all Americans will be eligible to get it. I still haven't I'm not able to do it right now. I just checked earlier, and there's still all sorts of tiers and priority lists of who's able to get the vaccine. But yeah, like you said, just everything getting back to normal. Good thing. Maybe Tatum and Smart can go hang out with people and stuff now.
Yeah, I messaged LeetSpeak, well-known Celtics Reddit mod, the other day saying hey, are you planning to go to any of the games once you're allowed back? And she was like, yes, absolutely. And I was like, great, you need to come on the podcast as soon as you've done that. We'd love to hear from you, what that experience was like attending a Celtics game, definitely still in the middle of a huge global pandemic. What was that like? Even just because it's just some crazy, it's like a science fiction story, getting into being let in based on your vaccination status, and having to present a certificate or a QR code or whatever it is. It's very bizarre. And then just watching the game with partial fans, I'm very curious to hear about what that's like. So hopefully we can get LeetSpeak on to talk about that. That's going to do it for this one. I think we're done there. And look, chin up, Celtics fans. It could be a lot worse. We could be the Rockets. we've got fans coming back into TD Garden pretty soon. Jeff Teague, he won't be around forever. There's hope on the horizon, right? Jackson, Larbird 33, any parting words of hope or encouragement or inspiration for the fan base?
After you, Larry. After you.
It's tough to come by.
Nah, we're fucked. But I did want to say, Ben, I got the care package from Australia. I want everyone to know who's listening. He sent me this really nice care package. It had Celtics sweater, and it had some basketball cards and some beers that I guess you had to. How did you get those for customs? What was the secret there?
Cooking vinegars is what I put on in the end.
Cooking vinegars.
Yeah.
Nice. And then there was some Vegemite, and my wife was very excited about this. So the next morning she made me some breakfast and put some Vegemite on some toast and forced me to eat it, and then recorded me expecting me to throw up or something. I didn't give her the reaction she wanted. I think I was just like, okay, it's interesting. Just trying to wrap my mind around it. It's a little different, but thank you very much. I really, really appreciate it. That was really awesome.
Oh, no worries, man. Look, I've sent a care package to Jackson and Joe as well. If you're a long-standing member of this podcast, you will get a care package. So let that go out to all of the known Celtics, like Bill Simmons, John Corrales. If you join our podcast, you stick around for a couple of episodes, you will get a care package.
Come on, Bill.
That's right. Yeah, you get. I also sent him a VP.
And there was some. There was some Quidditch or cricket collector's cards in there. Thank you very much for the Quidditch.
You're very welcome.
Yeah. I didn't know they had collector's cards for cricket.
If you hold on to them long enough, they'll probably be more valuable than all your Top Shot moments. So
right.
All right, folks, thank you for listening. Subscribe to the podcast, add a comment to the Reddit post for the show. We love hearing from you guys and from our listeners. We'll be back in a week or so. Until next time, go Celtics. Peace.